The GLUT system by Laura Drzich
and Jose.
In the bloodstream, glucose can enter cells through the glucose uniporter. From now on, we'll call them GLUT 1 through 4. As you can see, the GLUT receptor opens like a saloon door. Once glucose is inside the cell, if not phosphorylated by glucokinase, it may be allowed to exit through the same GLUT uniporter. Phosphorylated glucose can then enter two distinct metabolic pathways. If the cell requires energy, glucose will enter the glycolysis pathway to produce ATP. If the cell does not need further energy, it will then travel the glycogen synthase pathway and store glucose in the form of glycogen. In the next few slides, we will introduce low and high glycemic index foods into our cell glucose systems. First up is a head of lettuce. As you have noticed, our system has 4 cell tissue types with different GLUT uniporters. Let's take a look at the muscle cell. The muscle uses GLUT 1 uniporters. They have a fairly high affinity for glucose, and they are also expressed in all tissue types. Next up is a neural cell. It expresses GLUT 3 uniporters. Your brain has priority over all other tissue types for glucose, which is why it has even higher affinity for glucose than GLUT 1 uniporters. Lastly, we'll look at the GLUT 2 uniporters expressed in pancreatic beta cells and liver cells. The pancreas samples blood glucose levels and secretes insulin when levels are high. The liver uptakes glucose mainly for glycogen storage. They have rather low affinity for glucose. Let's step back and take a look at how these uniporters uptake glucose from the bloodstream of a low glycemic index food item. As you'll notice, our bloodstream is free of glucose. After uptake of glucose, the muscle and neural cell will use it for production of energy, otherwise known as ATP. The pancreatic beta cell will secrete insulin. If there is any remaining glucose in the bloodstream, it will instigate further glucose uptake by cells. The liver cell will store glucose as glycogen. Now we take a look at a high glycemic index food such as candy. Our candy corn will produce more glucose than our head of lettuce. As you'll notice, all of our GLUT uniporters have been saturated with glucose, leaving us with glucose in the bloodstream. As before, insulin is secreted by the pancreatic beta cell. Insulin will dock on receptors that will stimulate further glucose uptake and glycogen storage. High blood glucose levels will stimulate muscle, adipose, or liver cells to produce GLUT 4 uniporters. These have a very high affinity for glucose and will allow saturated cells to uptake more glucose for further storage. As you'll notice, the liver is storing quite a lot of glycogen. The muscle cell will use what they need for ATP and store the rest. The neural cell cannot store glycogen.
Powered by Wilk.